Movie reviewers on YouTube are no strangers to controversy. On a website where anyone can make an account and present themselves however they like, within reason, you'll discover a vast array of different personalities, be they individuals who just want to entertain the masses, or those with much more malicious intentions. A lot of the time, these controversies are not related to the main content that an individual creates, but rather shady practices they partake in behind the scenes to keep their brand afloat. With that said, there have been users over the years where the contentious discussion around them does not stem from any sort of wrongdoing per se, and is almost solely geared toward the opinions of said individuals and the way they present themselves. Such is the case with Confused Matthew, a movie reviewer who gained unexpected traction on the website back in 2008. The idea behind Confused Matthew's show was that the character was reviewing popular movies where he disagreed with the general consensus, particularly in regard to the way the films were written. The confused part of his titular character is not necessarily referring to how he feels about the film in question, but is rather a product of his bewilderment as to why and how the films received the positive attention they did.
What I love about this persona is that it's in the title. Everything you need to know is in the title. He's very confused, right? It's so self-descriptive, it's like, it's unintentionally perfect.
Reactions to Confused Matthew were quite polarized, with some considering him to be an insightful critic, others considering him to be a moronic fool, others considering him to be entertaining, even if they disagreed with him, and others yet considering him to be a troll who was dunking on these beloved products for attention. Confused Matthew was someone who you could say fell into the angry reviewer subgenre, having taken inspiration from the likes of James Rolfe and Doug Walker as a basis for his show. The character of Confused Matthew was created by a man named Daniel Warren, who was initially anonymous before revealing his face and name much later in his content. While Daniel Warren has retired his character and looked back on different parts of his reviewing days both positively and negatively, why exactly did his reviews cause such a buzz amongst those who saw them? I myself can only speak from the perspective of a viewer of his content back in the day, but thankfully, there are a couple of other people who can help provide us with some additional information.
He's been out of the YouTube game for so long that I feel like I more know him as like a personal friend than I do as like a 2006 YouTuber, which is funny.
That was Frankie from the channel Red Cow Entertainment. Frankie was a viewer of Confused Matthews back in the day, who eventually went on to do an interview with him as part of his Discount Film School podcast. Prior to making this video, I reached out to Frankie in hopes that he could put me in contact with Confused Matthew for an interview. Matthew, aka Daniel, respectfully declined, but we did get a pretty good, stand-in.
You have to understand that for what you guys heard on that channel, those of you who watched it and liked it, I grew up with that, so that was literally what I was exposed to all the time growing up with Dan.
And that was Gabriel Warren, brother of Confused Matthew, who is better known by his online alias, Stand-In Stan. We will get more into his contributions to Confused Matthew's show as we continue. With all that established, let's delve right into the history of Confused Matthew. Confused Matthew opened up his YouTube channel on May 26, 2007. His first upload was posted the same day, under the title Star Trek Generations, The Crappy Ending. This was an unscripted video recorded with a low-quality microphone, wherein he summarizes the ending of Star Trek Generations, while critiquing it for its confusing and ridiculous elements.
For those of you who never got around to watching the end of Star Trek Generations, I'm going to sum it up for you right now. Captain Picard finds himself sucked up into the Nexus, and he materializes inside a house. In this house are a bunch of kids that we've never seen before who don't exist, a house that doesn't exist, and a wife that doesn't exist. This goes on for about 15 minutes of Captain Picard just walking around this house that we've never seen before and will never see again.
In this video, there is a picture of a cartoon avatar that says Matthew felt confused. Whenever he talks about elements of the movie he felt were poorly or underexplained. This was an image that he found on Google while searching up the word confused, and was eventually used as a basis for the character.
He was looking for stuff to put into Windows Movie Maker, as you do back then, and he had typed confused into Google, and that picture, the Matthew Felt Confused picture, was the first picture that came up. So he was like, oh, Confused Matthew. Okay, that's the name of the channel, and that's how that happened.
Confused Matthew continued making shorter, loosely structured videos talking about movies for the rest of 2007, including reviews of James Cameron's Titanic, Star Trek First Contact, and the ending of 28 Days Later. According to him, he was initially making videos for his close friends and family to laugh at, and never expected much of a viewership outside of that. However, in the beginning of 2008, he embarked on a larger project. For this new video, he decided to make a more in-depth and tightly scripted review that spanned multiple parts, and dissected the entire plot of the work in question. He also decided to pick a movie that he had a very negative opinion about, despite the fact that many people held it in high regard.
Back to the Future, Part 2, is one of the worst sequels that's ever been put to film. I mean, it's awful. I mean, it is bad. I mean, this needs to be shown in film schools all across the country as an example of what not to do in a sequel.
In the video, Confused Matthew criticizes the movie for various reasons. Some of the general complaints levied against it are that Biff Tannen was extremely out of character, Marty all of a sudden being insulted for being called a chicken came out of nowhere, and that many of the scenes, such as the hoverboard chase and the entire final act, were complete retreads of the first movie. This review was initially released in 3 separate parts, uploaded over a month, which became the standard that Confused Matthew reviews followed afterward. This review was also notably the first video that included the Confused Matthew theme song, which, whether the audience liked his reviews or not, was often praised as being extremely catchy and memorable.
You know his words will get you farther than the film will ever go. Give him a moment of your time, he'll tell you what's wrong with the show. He knows what's good, what's bad, what's really bad. His face is just a sign. Say hello to Confused Matthew.
The Confused Matthew theme song was written and performed by his brother, who adapted it from a previous song he created called Sex with an XXXXX.
You know my looks will get me farther than my heart will ever go. You want to hang around with me, I'll introduce you to my show. You've got the brightest eyes I've ever seen, but I will just resign. Go home and have sex with my snake.
He said, I want you to make up a theme song for my Confused Matthew thing using just the chorus for that song that you made, because he really liked that. He really liked that song. I instead of his face is just a sign, I said I made up something like da 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 da. Now here is his reply, and he was like, no. These are not replies. I am not replying to anybody. This is my opinion, and everybody else has their opinion. This is not a reply. So he ended up writing all the words himself.
The Back to the Future Part 2 video received much more attention than any of Confused Matthew's previous uploads. The responses ranged from positive to negative to somewhere in between. Even though the movie Back to the Future Part 2 actually got somewhat mixed reviews upon its release, nowadays it is hailed by many as being great, putting Confused Matthew firmly in the general minority. The quote-unquote success of the video promoted Confused Matthew to create another review about another popular film in which he had a dissenting opinion. This time, though, he wasn't going after a critically mixed film that received more positive attention over time. This time, he was tackling a movie that, from the moment it was released to this very day, is often considered to be one of the greatest and most highly celebrated films ever made.
I've hated The Lion King from the moment I first saw it as a kid. I left the theater back then completely astounded by what Disney had done to their once flawless succession of films, and instantly predicted that this would be a phenomenal flop. I mean, no one could actually like this film, right? What's there to like? So with this review, I am going to demonstrate just how awful this film truly was. I will demonstrate that, with the possible exception of the animation, the film has no redeeming quality at all. It is, in fact, horrible.
Released throughout May of 2008, Confused Matthew's review of The Lion King could be considered to be his most significant and controversial review of all time. While his Back to the Future Part 2 review drummed up some attention, The Lion King was the one that really put Confused Matthew on the map, reaching far more than 100,000 views on the first part alone. Also, as hyperbolic and negative as the Back to the Future Part 2 review was at times, The Lion King was much more scathing, as Confused Matthew seemingly hated pretty much every aspect of the story and characters. Some of the more prominent complaints that he makes were that he found young Simba to be an asshole, and therefore couldn't bring himself to care about him. He found the entire first act of the movie to be pointless. He considered Timon and Pumbaa to be straight up evil for teaching Hakuna Matata to Simba, and he found many of the plot points in the movie to be stupid or contrived.
He didn't grow, he didn't change, he just rebooted. This character is the way he is for reasons totally unrelated to this character. If this character was going to be completely irrelevant to the last 2/3 of this film, why did we even need to watch the first third? Why didn't you just start the film right here?
According to Confused Matthew, reactions to this review were all over the place. Some said that it was completely brain-dead analysis that completely missed the point of the movie. Some people thought there was a little bit of insight at points, even if they disagreed with the overall verdict. And the scant few people who disliked The Lion King were thankful that someone was now putting a dissenting opinion out there. The only available screenshot of the Lion King review's original like-to-dislike ratio was 1,127 likes to 1,768 dislikes. Thus, while it's fair to say that the response to this review was not particularly favorable, there were enough people that either enjoyed it or were interested enough to continue watching Confused Matthew and garner him a small following.
Yeah, and then it became obvious that his shtick, his brand, his point of view, the reason to watch him is because he has what the kids would now call L takes. He'll tell you why The Lion King is bad because Simba is actually an immoral character, and here's all the reasons why.
The Lion King review made it clear that Confused Matthew was now making content with an audience in mind. Thus, his next big review came out only 1 month later. This time he was tackling Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, with reviews of the other 2 Star Wars prequels following shortly in the months afterward. Unlike Back to the Future Part 2 or The Lion King, a negative review of the Star Wars prequels was not all that out of the ordinary, especially back in 2008. While Confused Matthew was someone who gained a reputation for disagreeing with the general public, in reality, the vast majority of his reviews covered movies that were financially successful, but divided in terms of their critical and audience reception. After pissing so many off with his first 2 bigger reviews, Confused Matthew had now gained a newfound respect for tackling films that many were already angered by and disappointed with in the first place.
But why the hell are the Jedi going along with this? This is what peace and justice is to them? Stay in the Republic or die? What the hell kind of Jedi are these? Guardians of Truth and Justice my ass.
I think March of 2006, I had a cartoon that I had made in 2003 that was called Lord of the Rings by George Lucas. And then I made a follow-up in like 2008, like 5 years later, called How George Lucas Might Fuck Up Indiana Jones 4. Confused Matthew left a comment on it that said, I think on the Indiana Jones one, that said like, "You done Confused Matthew proud, boy." And so I was like, who the hell is Confused Matthew? And why do I care if he's happy? And so I clicked this channel, and what I saw was, I don't know, a 3-part review of The Phantom Menace that was in depth. So it was like 30 minutes. And then I find out that he's done Attack of the Clones and he's done Revenge of the Sith as well. And I was like, it blew my mind that on YouTube you could watch essentially a 90-minute movie that was a review of these other movies.
After he finished the Star Wars prequel reviews in July, Confused Matthew tackled The Matrix Reloaded and Revolutions, which again, were hardly critical darlings. In addition to finding the movies to be bad, The Matrix reviews also lambasted the philosophical elements that the Wachowskis used as a basis for those sequels, as Daniel Warren was well versed in the subject at the time. Another notable thing about this review is that the avatar that Confused Matthew used in previous videos received an aesthetic change to be dressed up like Neo from The Matrix. While this new avatar was dropped after The Matrix reviews, this did prompt Confused Matthew to create an updated version of it for his subsequent videos. Say hello to Confused Matthew, the Generation 2 face.
For me, the cartoon face took off, and our friend Allison redrew it and made it a little bit different, and then she drew the Stan character. So it just became kind of a fun thing.
In October, Confused Matthew released his next review of the horror movie Saw. This film was the first one in his series, in which Confused Matthew did not have much of a personal investment toward, having only seen it a few times, and not leaving a large impact in his mind. Also, while Confused Matthew had addressed people like George Lucas, the Wachowskis, Robert Zemeckis, and Bob Gale in his previous reviews, this was the first time he started coming across as downright apprehensive toward the writer.
Throughout this whole pathetic excuse to show us people in traps, they try to thread together some kind of mystery as to who the killer is. And since this guy can't deliver anything in the way of talent or imagination, we naturally have scenes that try and convince us in one way or another that every character might be the killer. You can't write.
The "you can't write" line was supposedly inspired by an episode of Hell's Kitchen, where Gordon Ramsay told a chef, "You can't cook." While Confused Matthew himself states that he regrets this aspect of the review, as he has lost his appeal for the Gordon Ramsay style of entertainment, I wouldn't say that it makes the review irredeemable. The problem is how this plants a seed for the future of Confused Matthew, in which his reviews become much more hostile toward the filmmakers involved. Confused Matthew's next review was uploaded around December. His opponent this time around was Spider-Man 3. Aside from making a few amusing factual errors, this movie was another case of low-hanging fruit, so the review didn't stir up much controversy. This is also notable for being Confused Matthew's first review of a superhero film, and believe me when I tell you it won't be his last. In fact, Confused Matthew ended off the year by covering yet another superhero movie, this time being Pixar's The Incredibles. This was a very different review for Confused Matthew, as it was the first time he was covering a movie that he didn't think was bad per se, but instead one where he found the overall tone to be far too depressing and cynical for his own liking. This is what Confused Matthew would later label as a subjective review, which sparked a conversation of what it means to be objective as a film critic. Many people took this to mean that Confused Matthew believed his opinions on a film were objectively right, which he clarified at a later point as not being the case.
Every film critic reviews subjectively, and I am no different. Otherwise, there would be no dissenting opinions at all. Simba really did disobey 4 of his elders in the beginning of the movie. Those conclusions are based on things that really did happen. I can't imagine why anyone would come to a different conclusion based on those things, but whether or not you agree with them, they really are things that actually happened in the movie. I am not making this up.
The idea of objectivity in this case was referring to what he felt were legitimate flaws with a film, rather than aspects of it that he personally didn't like. I'm sure everyone out there has at least 1 or 2 movies, or pieces of art in general, that they don't consider to be definitively bad, but doesn't connect with them on a personal level. The Incredibles review was meant to exemplify the difference between what Confused Matthew considers to be a subjective opinion as opposed to an objective one. The issue with that is that whatever is or isn't considered to be an objective criticism is, well, subjective.
And I think fun is a subjective thing.
Well, you're the subject enjoying it, but it's an objective fact that you're having fun.
Fascinating.
2009 began with Confused Matthew tackling the television show Star Trek Deep Space Nine, specifically its final season, which he felt dropped the ball in terms of quality. If you couldn't tell by this, and his other videos on Generations and First Contact, Confused Matthew is a big Star Trek fan and covered the series quite a bit, even occasionally with his brother or a fellow reviewer named SF Debris. As he was in the process of making his Deep Space Nine review, a bit of an issue began to plague his channel. Anyone who was on YouTube back in 2008 to 2009 likely remembers the trials and tribulations that the film community went through around this time. Due to copyright holders being very stringent about their intellectual properties, many who talked about movies would get their videos struck down, and in certain cases, have their entire channels removed from YouTube. The most notable example of this was Doug Walker's Nostalgia Critic series, leading him to create his own website, thatguywiththeglasses.com, wherein he hosted his content via the now defunct Blip TV. Confused Matthew was starting to find himself in the same pickle. Only 2 captures of the original YouTube channel exist on the Wayback Machine, the first one being from January 13th, 2009. In the description of the channel, he states the following: Confused Matthew is currently on hiatus. Don't blame me, blame YouTube. I am currently in the middle of creating a new website for my reviews. I will be posting updates on the site's progress on this channel, so stay tuned. I'll be back. Confused Matthew's reviews slowed down for the first 2 months of 2009 due to him working on construction of his website. It was during this dark period when Daniel's brother began posting on his own Stand-in Stan channel. Essentially, the idea behind Stand-in Stan as a character was to review movies that Matthew didn't want to cover, or delve into topics outside of the realm of art, such as religion and politics.
When Matthew's on vacation or he doesn't want to do it, you've got Stand-in Stan. Stand-in Stan. He doesn't review often, but he's got some good opinions. He is Stand-in Stan. Stand-in Stan. It's not Confused Matthew, but it's better than nothing. Here comes Stand-in Stan. Stand-in Stan.
Confused Matthew's site launched on March 6, 2009, and was the beginning of what many consider to be the second era for the character. The site was divided into several pages, which included the homepage, videos, written reviews, a forum, frequently asked questions, contact, donate, and links. The video page was divided into movie reviews, television show reviews, and random stuff. What's interesting to note is that the oldest video on the site is listed as the Lion King review, but that was not the first one that he made. He explains this in the frequently asked questions. Didn't you review more movies than this? I distinctively remember reviews for Back to the Future Part 2, Star Trek First Contact, and Titanic. Where are they? I have never been happy with my recording quality or the sound of my own voice in any of my reviews before The Lion King. Therefore, I will be re-recording my old reviews and posting them onto the site. In the meantime, you can watch all of my old reviews and videos at youtube.com/confusedmatthew. Despite his claim, Confused Matthew only ended up re-recording one of his previous reviews, that being Back to the Future Part 2. Star Trek First Contact would end up getting a mini-review much later, along with the rest of the Star Trek films, and Titanic would receive the extended Confused Matthew treatment a few years down the line. Before we get ahead of ourselves though, there is one more notable question in the FAQ. What's the worst movie you've ever seen? The worst movie I have ever seen in my life is a closely guarded secret. I will review it eventually, but on a very, very special occasion. As for the site's other pages, the written reviews section contained 5 reviews, those being The X-Files I Want to Believe, WALL-E, The Dark Knight, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and Walk the Line. These were all reviews that were initially uploaded to Confused Matthew's MySpace page. Confused Matthew only ended up making 2 more written reviews on this page, those being for the 2009 films Star Trek and The Day the Earth Stood Still. This website going forward would be the hub for all things Confused Matthew, with his YouTube channel being used to post trailers to inform his audience of new releases. It wasn't long after the website launched when Confused Matthew got back into the swing of video production, finishing his Deep Space Nine review and releasing new reviews of Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End and Star Trek Generations. The latter review is notable, as when Confused Matthew originally created his show, he envisioned Star Trek Generations as being the big finale, which he would use as a send-off for the character. However, since he had started to garner a following and was now making money off of his website, he decided to push forward.
So I had intended to stop at Star Trek Generations. Star Trek Generations was going to be the very last thing. It was going to be the last hurrah. I'm done. That was fun. Hope everybody liked it. And I'm going to move on. And a lot of people were like, no, don't go. We want to hear more. We want to hear, we want more reviews. This can't go away. And I was like, wow. People care this much about what I say? People care this much about me continuing to do this? This is crazy. But it's kind of cool, you know, when people like what you do, or, you know, even if they don't, they're watching, so I must be doing something right. So I said, alright, Confused Matthew Phase 2.
But if Confused Matthew had run out of movies that he really passionately disliked, how was he supposed to keep things going? The answer, for better or for worse, is a lot of experimentation. On his YouTube channel, Confused Matthew had a to-do list of what reviews he would be making in the future to give his audience an idea of what to expect. The next full review Confused Matthew uploaded covered Independence Day. The big difference between this video as opposed to the previous ones is that Confused Matthew liked this movie quite a bit. considering it to be extremely stupid, but really fun at the same time. Confused Matthew also branched out in new directions beyond his longer videos. Around May of 2009, he posted a new website page called Requests, where his fans could donate $25 to have a movie of their choosing reviewed. By June, Confused Matthew released his first requested review, which happened to cover one of his favorite movies of all time, Pulp Fiction. It was also evident that a lot of Confused Matthew's fans really wanted to hear his opinions on certain topics, as by the time the Pulp Fiction video had come out, he received a whopping 20 additional requests, which would only continue increasing. Confused Matthew's requested reviews were also notable for containing a cover of the Confused Matthew theme song made by one of his fans.
His reviews will get you further than the film will ever go. If you give him just a moment of your time, he'll let you know which movies rock, which movies stink, which movies shouldn't have been released. Say hello to Confused Matthew.
At some point, he eventually was like, hey, if you give me $20, I'll review any movie you want. He did that for a little while. And my wife was like, I want him to do Pumping Iron. So we have it somewhere. Yeah, I requested Lady in the Water. So I had just seen it around that time, and I thought that would be perfect for him. This was before M. Night Shyamalan was definitely a bad filmmaker.
Another new page on the website around this time was Stan's Corner, wherein Stand-In Stan would make videos of his own. Stan's first video on the website was a review of Meet the Spartans, and eventually, his page would be divided into 3 different subsections. One for movies, one for music, and one for social commentary. As the website continued, Stand-In Stan would double the content he created for this section by making one more review of the movie Apocalypto. The Stan's music and social commentary sections never saw any activity, with him preferring to create videos for his own YouTube channel instead.
I was going to be just a guest, but I wanted to make a channel because I wanted to talk to people. And that was my thing back then, is I wasn't ever, and neither was Dan. None of this was to get, because back then, again, YouTube, people didn't start YouTube channels to start a business or to start their own radio show or to get an audience. They made YouTube stuff, again, it's like, for the reasons that you would post a comment on Facebook or something. It was very, very different. It was very much an extension of the internet forums that I went on.
Stand-In Stan did, however, make frequent appearances in a new series from Confused Matthew called General Reviews. Here they would talk about their initial reactions to movies, often new releases, starting with Star Trek 2009, which they both disliked. This was another video that received backlash as, while the J.J. Abrams Star Trek movies aren't looked back on too fondly nowadays, the hype surrounding the first one in particular upon release was quite enormous. Beyond this, the summer and early fall of 2009 didn't see many more contentious reviews, with his flagship series tackling critically mixed films such as Armageddon, Star Wars The Clone Wars, and The Golden Compass. Surprisingly, the most controversial video Matthew uploaded around this time came in the form of a requested review for the movie Spirited Away, which was uploaded around early September. This video was contentious not only because Matthew disliked the movie, but because he criticized anime as a whole, saying that he couldn't fathom why anyone else likes the medium.
To be perfectly honest, or rather brutally honest, I can't stand anime. I don't like it, and I don't understand why anyone else does. Now, going into what I don't like about it would be fruitless, as they are all personal problems and not problems having to do with the actual genre, and that is the distinction I will try to keep in mind as we proceed.
He also makes very bizarre claims in the review, saying that the main character, Chihiro, was supposed to be portrayed as spoiled, and the movie failed to deliver on that premise. As far as I can tell, there's nothing within the film that suggests that Chihiro is supposed to be portrayed this way, causing many people to believe that Matthew was living up to his confused namesake. It's probably worth noting that Confused Matthew later changed his opinion on anime as a whole, becoming a big fan of series such as Death Note and Lucky Star. Whether or not he ever reassessed Spirited Away is unbeknownst to me. After the Spirited Away video, Confused Matthew continued making reviews without much pushback. However, November of 2009 was going to be a turning point in the channel's history, as he was about to release arguably his most controversial review to date. This time, he was giving a negative review to a movie that is often considered to be one of the greatest of all time, and the result not only sparked more interest and debate than he had ever seen before, but also sent the trajectory of his review show in a completely different direction.
I can't even say that this is a non-movie. 2001: A Space Odyssey is an anti-movie. A movie with nothing happening, nothing being said, and nothing being done. A movie that is literally about nothing.
As far as the blip era is concerned, 2001: A Space Odyssey is easily Confused Matthew's most significant review for a few different reasons. First off, this was possibly the review that Matthew got the most response from, with the exception of debatably The Lion King, causing more controversy from his audience than ever before. Secondly, this is the beginning of what I like to call the nothing happens era, in which all of his criticisms regarding a film pretty much boil down to nothing happening within the story.
Landscape. More landscape. 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 More landscape. More landscape. Landscape.
This was also a significant review for Confused Matthew in the sense that, while it was a popular movie that he personally didn't like, it was also a movie which he later admitted he had no particular attachment toward. While he had issues with movies like The Lion King or Back to the Future Part 2, those were actually movies he felt passionate about due to seeing flaws within the story and characters. 2001: A Space Odyssey was a movie that Confused Matthew didn't like because he wasn't a fan of abstract art house cinema. That's a perfectly valid opinion to have, but it doesn't offer much in terms of analysis.
I went from talking about films in a somewhat semi-constructive way to just talking about films that I did not like. It was just the negative. There was no constructive anything whatsoever. And that began with 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was a film that I had no personal investment in whatsoever. This is a film that I had seen maybe 5 times, and the most I could say about it is I didn't like it.
What really enraged Confused Matthew's audience, though, were 2 particular statements he makes about the movie. One being that it was not really a film, and the other being that it was objectively about nothing. This caused a lot of people to believe that Confused Matthew was restricting art by saying what should or shouldn't be counted as a movie. The ironic thing is that many considered Confused Matthew's review of 2001 to not actually be a movie review, due to him failing to analyze the film in any way. With that said, not all responses to the 2001 review were negative, with a small minority of people agreeing with his opinion, and others finding the review to be funny even if they disagreed.
So let's break down what happens here. Guy gets out of the ship, sees another guy. Guy sees him, but then he turns into that guy. Guy sees old guy, turns into old guy. Old guy sees monolith. Space fetus. Uh-huh. So the hell what? He could have been a space fetus or a turkey sandwich, and it would have been just as meaningful or just as meaningless.
Following the 2001 review would be no easy feat, and as such, Confused Matthew decided to end the year by finally revealing and reviewing what the worst movie he ever saw in his life was. The answer to that question surprised many.
Minority Report is the worst movie I have ever seen in my life. Watching it is one of the worst experiences I have ever had in my life.
While 2001 was the review that I felt started the turning point within Confused Matthew's character, Minority Report was the one that solidified it. Being that this was the worst movie that Confused Matthew had ever seen in his life, he decided to go into the review being much more abrasive than ever before.
The 2 clowns that wrote this piece of shit wouldn't even have been able to put finger to keyboard in writing this abysmal screenplay without his endorsement. And even if they had, no one would have given this film any attention whatsoever without the Spielberg seal of approval on it. Just as Hitler wouldn't have got as far as he did without Chamberlain, these bozos wouldn't have had a leg to stand on without Spielberg. And yes, I am in fact comparing this movie to Hitler.
This not only pertained to screaming at the movie much louder than he did in previous instances, but also directly calling 2 people out, those being Steven Spielberg for directing it, and Roger Ebert for endorsing it. While Confused Matthew had occasionally made direct comments towards artists and critics he disagreed with, his approach to this in the Minority Report review was by far the harshest to this point.
If either of these two individuals actually believe that this movie was good, that it was worth your time, that you should actually pay to watch it, they are either stupid or they're lying. There is no other possible explanation.
Minority Report was a movie that irked Confused Matthew so much that he actually went to demand his money back once it was over. After being told he couldn't receive it since he sat through the whole film, he went home and emailed Steven Spielberg himself, asking for a refund. To this day, Spielberg has yet to respond.
I was there when he came home from the theater. He was saying he was mad. He was like throwing shit, and he's like, I went up, I asked for a refund. I've never asked for a refund for a movie in my life, and they wouldn't give me a refund. That now he emailed Steven Spielberg and demanded a refund right in front of me. And he was like, oh, he was mad. He was pissed when he came home from that.
The reason Minority Report in 2001 exemplified the turning point in Confused Matthew's character is because they both contain a lot of elements that both he and his audience cite as plaguing his later work. The 2001 review, as entertaining as it may be, does not really contain any useful or constructive criticisms, and boils down to him not caring for the type of film it is. Minority Report, while structured much more like a typical review, and containing some insight here and there, suffers from being way too direct and personal toward both the filmmakers and critics who disagreed with him. It was also these two reviews where Confused Matthew really started to take the idea of an objective opinion to a new level, and claimed that certain movies were not actually films due to them lacking characters, narrative, or a story. All of these issues caused a larger rift in Confused Matthew's audience, which was already divided from the beginning. Daniel Warren has explained that a lot of the shift within the character was due to personal issues he was having behind the scenes.
And I started being openly hostile towards people who would maybe necessarily like the stuff that I didn't like. And that was really a result of a lot of personal problems I was having in my personal life, and also, Lena, let's just be direct. I had a very serious drug dependency at the time. I was on Oxy, and it really affected my work.
Yeah, well, the way I remember thinking of it as he became more elevated, I didn't know that it was due to personal stuff until he mentioned it. But I thought it was more like the less insight and commentary he had about a movie, the more the character piece of it had to make up for the lack of insight about the movie. It's like, not so dissimilar, not to bring it back to James Rolfe, but, you know, once you've reviewed all of your childhood NES games and now you're just kind of like digging for like, what else can I say? Because YouTube demands constant content. Yeah, that kind of, you end up having to make up for it by yelling more or something. So you don't have anything to say about it.
After the Minority Report review, 2010 proved to be a much less active year for Confused Matthew, at least as far as his main show is concerned. He only released one other Confused Matthew review for the movie Knowing, a pretty reviled Nicolas Cage movie that nowadays is forgotten by the general public. He also introduced a new segment called Mixed Reviews, that covered movies he had a lot to say about, but was conflicted in definitively calling them good or bad. He made 2 mixed reviews this year, those being for War of the Worlds and 2010, the year we make contact. Beyond his longer reviews, Confused Matthew spent the majority of 2010 catching up in his side projects, as well as introducing new ones. The requested reviews list had become gargantuan, with a whopping 40 reviews on the back burner. This caused Confused Matthew to temporarily put a hold on requests until he was able to catch up with the ones he had on his plate. A segment that saw a lot of changes this year were his general reviews. While prior to this, the general reviews were almost always featuring Confused Matthew and Stand-In Stan, now many of them were either Confused Matthew on his own or with guests. These guests included Confused Matthew's significant other, who adopted the name Baffled Beth, as well as his co-worker, who went under the alias Temporary Ryan. However, Temporary Ryan only used his alias temporarily, as he eventually replaced his name with Replacement Ryan. While most of these reviews played out the way you would expect, with negative, positive, and mixed opinions, there is one general review from this year that does hold some significance. That was a general review of Iron Man 2, where Confused Matthew and Stan lambasted the movie for a multitude of reasons. Iron Man 2 received mixed reception to begin with, so while the review itself didn't spark much controversy, its significance lies in the seed that this was planting for one of Confused Matthew's biggest upcoming targets. Confused Matthew also started up a new series this year called Responses to Responses. In this series, he would respond to some of the comments that he received that countered the points he made in his reviews in an attempt to have a more open discussion. The first 3 videos in this series covered his most controversial reviews, those being The Lion King, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Back to the Future Part 2. After that, Confused Matthew decided to tackle a highly requested response video from a user named Chase Melendez.
After 40 plus years of philosophical conversation about the implications and influence and meaning of 2001, it would be great to hear some fresh critical perspective on the issue. Now, don't get me wrong, I was very doubtful that you could pull this off, seeing as how no one really has been able to do that in 40 years. But nonetheless, I was willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Man, oh man, did you disappoint. You seem to have invented new ways of disappointing here, Matthew.
In January of 2010, Melendez created a 9-part response to Confused Matthew's 2001 review called Chase Explains 2001 to Confused Matthew Because Someone Really Needs to. In this series, Melendez went through Confused Matthew's review bit by bit and responded to a lot of his criticisms. This prompted Confused Matthew to do the same thing using the format of his Responses to Responses series. Unfortunately, while the response series started off strongly, tragedy would strike in the middle of production. It was brought to light in early 2011 that Chase Melendez had sadly passed away on March 26th of that year. This prompted Confused Matthew to discontinue his response to Chase and take it down out of respect. 2001: A Space Odyssey had become the single movie that Confused Matthew talked about the most. Aside from his 3-part original review, he had also made an afterword to said review, a 3-part review of its sequel, 2010: The Year We Make Contact, which in itself contained a prelude, a Responses to Responses video, a multi-part response series to Chase Melendez, and later a random rant called Terry Gilliam, A Smug Odyssey, responding to Gilliam's take on the film. 2001 also became a topic of discussion in many of Confused Matthew's other videos, where he would mention it offhandedly. As a satirical joke, Confused Matthew also uploaded a video entitled Purple Monkey Dishwasher, which he touted as being his first foray into filmmaking. In actuality, the video is a 2-hour-long image of a man sitting in a rocking chair, which was meant to poke fun at the minimalistic and abstract style used in 2001. From the outside looking in, it would be fair to assume that Confused Matthew's disdain for 2001 was stronger than any other movie that he reviewed. As mentioned earlier, that wasn't actually the case.
These people used to, back in the day, his friends or whatever, they'd give him these art films and stuff, and he'd watch it and he would get all Confused Matthew about it. And he always perceived that as the person making that film. If you have to do that, then you're not good enough to actually tell a story, and you have to obfuscate. And his view is that is an attempt for somebody without storytelling talent to try and fool people into thinking that they're brilliant or something.
Since 2010 was somewhat light on Confused Matthew's main reviews, he decided to start off 2011 by conducting a poll in which users could request which review on his to-do list they wanted him to cover next. One stipulation he made was that users could not vote for No Country for Old Men. The reason for this being is that this was now set to be Confused Matthew's new final review, after he decided to continue beyond Star Trek Generations, as he hated No Country for Old Men vehemently. However, he decided to change his mind thanks to Hitler. No, I'm not kidding. One of his fans created an internet meme of Hitler freaking out over Confused Matthew leaving No Country for Old Men for last, using clips from the movie Downfall. This was a very popular meme around this time, and Confused Matthew enjoyed it so much that he decided to change his mind, even though he still did not include it on the poll. The Last Samurai ended up winning, thus becoming the next Confused Matthew review. After this, Confused Matthew decided to do another mixed review, this time covering The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, which was highly requested amongst his fans. Confused Matthew then released his first installment in his series called Matthew's Favorite Movies. As the title would imply, these videos were much more positive, in-depth reviews surrounding his favorite films of all time. He started off this series by reviewing his favorite movie, Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge. He would continue this series later by tackling films such as The Dark Knight, Back to the Future, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Finding Nemo, Pan's Labyrinth, Beauty and the Beast, and Jurassic Park. Many of Confused Matthew's detractors had a much better impression of his positive reviews, finding them to be very insightful, and a great contrast to his more cynical shtick. While Confused Matthew had gained a different kind of reception with his Moulin Rouge review, the next video he released was the long-awaited No Country for Old Men review. Much like his 2001 review, this was a video that didn't offer much to chew on in terms of analysis, but instead focused on his guttural reaction to the film, which he found painfully slow and boring. This time around he was much angrier, however, so put the 2001 review and the Minority Report review into a blender, and you'd essentially get this.
So once he gets in there, he kind of wanders around the house and Llewellyn's not there. So he kind of wanders around the house and Llewellyn's not there. So he kind of wanders around the house and Llewellyn's not there. Stop telling me to shut up. That's all that's happening in the film right now. Why weren't you telling the film to shut up?
The No Country for Old Men video is the one that Daniel Warren looks back on with the most regret, considering it to retroactively be annoying, stupid, and a representation of everything that was wrong with the Blip era reviews. While his opinion on the movie hasn't changed, he freely admits that the movie didn't do anything wrong per se, they simply told the story in a way that he personally did not like.
But I kept it going, really having nothing useful to say. Certainly I don't think I said anything useful in the 2001 A Space Odyssey review. I didn't say anything useful in the No Country for Old Men review. God, that was a film that I really just didn't like, and just said I didn't like it with no, nothing to really learn from, nothing to really, analyze, or think about, really. I think that's probably the worst thing I ever did. Of all the things I did as in my tenure as Confused Matthew, and I don't know what the meaning of the word tenure is, so I apologize for misusing that. That's the worst I ever did. I'm embarrassed by it. The children are right to laugh at me, Ralph. It was horrible.
After the bombshell that was No Country for Old Men, 2011 was once again light on Confused Matthew's flagship series, with him focusing more on requests, smaller videos, responses to responses, and his new Matthew's Favorite Movies segment. He did release one more Confused Matthew review that year, that being a review of both Kill Bill movies. He also created two more new segments, the first one being Mini Views. In these videos, he would talk about highly requested films that he felt he didn't have enough to say about for a long in-depth analysis. These included The Lion King 1.5, Back to the Future Part 3, and The Matrix. The other segment he started this year was Observe and Report, where he would make short videos commenting on smaller aspects of movies or shows he found to be funny or interesting, but wouldn't really be suitable for a review. It seemed as though no matter how many things Confused Matthew had put on his back burner, he was always ready and willing to do more. Confused Matthew continued producing content into 2012, and he brought his flagship series back with a review of The Departed. While this, along with Kill Bill for that matter, were negative reviews, they were, for the most part, not as angry and mean-spirited as some of his other videos, since Daniel didn't really hate them despite finding problems with them. This would not be the case for his next review following The Departed, though, where Confused Matthew decided to finally give Iron Man 2 the 3-part review treatment. This was easily Confused Matthew's angriest review since No Country for Old Men. He criticized Iron Man 2 for having no story, too much pointless banter, and for dropping the ball after having a good foundation with Iron Man 1. The only redeeming factor he found was that Scarlett Johansson is hot.
I wanted to fuck the redhead. Great. They can put that on, the billing now. Confused Matthew.
He wanted to
fuck the redhead.
However, Confused Matthew's most notable contention with the movie came near the end of the review, where he said that it basically amounted to being nothing more than a product placement for the Avengers. When I said that the Iron Man 2 general review planted a seed for Confused Matthew going forward, this is what I mean by that. Confused Matthew absolutely hated the idea of a cinematic universe, mostly due to him feeling that the constant Easter eggs and build-up toward other movies sacrifice the qualities of the films on their own individual merits. While this sentiment probably isn't nearly that controversial nowadays, due to the amount of fatigue that audiences have regarding both cinematic universes and superheroes in general, Confused Matthew got a lot of flack at the time about this. He even ends the Iron Man 2 review by saying that, since the movie enraged him so much, he was never going to see the Avengers. This was a promise that his audience insisted that he did not keep. Following Iron Man 2, Confused Matthew surprisingly decided to go back and re-review 2 movies that he talked about previously, those being Titanic and Minority Report. The Titanic re-review came from the fact that Confused Matthew had so much more written about the movie, but was limited due to his primitive editing software and YouTube's 10-minute time limit. Now that he could use video clips and go into more detail, it was finally time to get his full thoughts on the film out there. While Confused Matthew rejects a lot of his reviews from the Blip era, he cites his Titanic review as being one of his better outings due to it being based on an older script, and thus not having many of his personal issues bleeding into the content.
Somebody just mentioned the Titanic review. That one I don't mind so much, but a lot of people don't know that was actually written years ago, and I never had a chance to do it because of YouTube's 10-minute time limit. So that one was okay, but that one I had done beforehand. That wasn't really a whole lot of my personal issues leaking into that one.
The Minority Report re-review stemmed from the regret that Confused Matthew held regarding his constant targeting and berating of Steven Spielberg and Roger Ebert. He believed that he went too far in this regard and had more to say about the movie's ending, prompting this re-review's existence. While Confused Matthew offered his apologies to Spielberg and Ebert, this didn't stop him from directly insulting filmmakers or going against critics in the future. Confused Matthew continued 2012 by reviewing Superman Returns and Peter Jackson's King Kong, 2 more reviews that were negative, but not necessarily scathing. The real rage, however, was found in a general review posted around October. While Confused Matthew had skipped out on seeing the Avengers in the theater due to popular demand, he finally decided to give the movie a go when it was released on DVD. The results should have surprised no one.
If I hadn't been watching this for the purposes of review, I would have turned this off at the part where Banner turns into the Hulk. There is nothing to care about here. And I know that I just pissed a whole bunch of people off and I'll have to go through hate mail after this, but please remember, I didn't want to do this in the first place. You guys have been asking me for months to review this movie and tell you what I think, so here it is. The Avengers was terrible. I didn't want to watch it once. I will certainly never watch it again.
After this general review, Confused Matthew did eventually go back to doing a mini-view on the Avengers sometime later. While his opinion on the movie didn't change much, this mini-view approached it in a much calmer and more constructive manner now that he had time to get over his personal bias. On the flip side of this, Confused Matthew released another general review of a newly released 2012 movie, that being The Dark Knight Rises. While he went into the Avengers with a negative bias, he went into the third entry of Christopher Nolan's trilogy with a positive bias, due to him really enjoying the first 2 entries. After the general review, Confused Matthew eventually released an addendum where he stated the movie had a lot more problems than he initially thought, and even eventually made a mixed review of it even further down the line. Superhero movies were becoming a big target for Confused Matthew, which continued with his next big review, X-Men 3: The Last Stand. He followed this up with a review of the remake of The Producers, in which he compared it heavily to the older version to demonstrate why the comedy worked in one case but not the other. The Producers review would be considered to be one of the more favorable ones if it wasn't for the fact that he made many jabs at Mel Brooks throughout the video, considering him to be a bad comedian. Not long after this review is when Frankie Frayne included Confused Matthew on the Discount Film School podcast. Here he states that he considers the success of Mel Brooks was due to him hiring comedians such as Rick Moranis, Gene Wilder, and Richard Pryor, who were good at ad-libbing.
That's what I don't understand about Mel Brooks. Like, I'm not a Mel Brooks fan. I think that his best works were done when he had the least to do with them.
I had to agree with you completely. I was really, like, as you were going through it, I was like, he's totally right.
Yeah, it's
derpy.
I don't think he's a very good writer. And that's not to say that I think there's anything wrong with liking just like lowbrow slapstick comedy where people are just farting. But for a filmmaker of supposedly that magnitude,
yeah.
for a filmmaker of such eminence, I would expect more from them.
Yeah.
That's something that a 6-year-old could do.
What was I on about with The Producers? Like, I was openly calling out Mel Brooks for some weird reason, as if he's, I don't know.
As Confused Matthew entered 2013, his content output started to slow down. While he kept making videos, it seemed as though he was starting to sunset many of his ongoing series. He finally caught up with all of his requested reviews, with the final one being A Night to Remember. However, he decided to discontinue the series for the time being, only opening himself up to new requests in 2014. The Confused Matthew and Matthew's Favorite Movies series continued, but had much less entries than before, along with his mini-views, general reviews, random rants, and the like. The topics of the content now covered a lot of superhero movies from the Marvel and DC cinematic universes. While Confused Matthew was harsh on Marvel in the past, he was actually starting to enjoy certain entries in their series, such as Iron Man 3, Thor the Dark World, and Captain America the Winter Soldier. DC, on the other hand, well, Confused Matthew was really looking forward to Man of Steel, having done a trailer reaction for it in anticipation. When the movie came out, he was not so pleased. After an extremely negative general review, he naturally adapted his thoughts into a full Confused Matthew review, which was arguably one of his angriest in a while. The only other Confused Matthew review from 2013 was a review of The Nightmare Before Christmas, which was another movie that he disliked but also felt mostly indifferent toward. Beyond that, 2013 came and went with not a whole lot of notable activity from Confused Matthew. The reason for this became clearer in 2014. A big thing that was happening to many Blip producers around this time is they were starting to transition back over onto YouTube. The reason for this being is that YouTube had finally calmed down a bit when it came to copyright restrictions, while Blip had become increasingly worse with them. Confused Matthew was no different, and brought his series back over to YouTube in 2014. In doing so, he also made the announcement that the Confused Matthew channel would be coming to a close in 2015, feeling that it had run its course.
Those reviews were just so bad and so off. Even when I got the content right, just the way I went about them was just all wrong. And it really was just a result of the things that I was going through. So that unfortunately lasted from about 2013 to 2015, where I said, you know what, I can't do this anymore.
Rather than going out with a whimper, Confused Matthew decided to up the scope and stakes in a big way. He created a positive, longer review of Iron Man 3, going into what he liked about it, showing he wasn't as close-minded to the Marvel Universe as many originally thought. Having enjoyed the Phase 2 Marvel movies significantly more than the Phase 1 outings, it seemed like he was starting to change his tune. Thus, he went into the next Marvel outing, Guardians of the Galaxy, with a lot of positivity, which was subsequently dashed as soon as he got out, and declared it as being one of Marvel's worst outings yet.
It's just an endless slog of plot exposition, backstory, and jokes that just die. Guardians of the Galaxy is the worst experience I have had watching a Marvel Cinematic Universe film so far.
Now that you bring that up, I do actually kind of remember a video of, I believe you were driving in the car or something, and he called you about
Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, exactly. And you were recording it while he was like screaming.
He called me on the phone. Yeah. He called me on the phone. He was screaming. I was with my wife, and he was screaming. He was screaming into the phone. I put it on the speakerphone, and I started recording surreptitiously. I wish that still. I didn't know anybody. I'd forgotten that I put that on. I must have asked his permission. He probably thought it was funny, but yeah, he just called up. He called me. This is what I'm telling you. He got out of the theater and he called me on the phone, and he started yelling and screaming, and I recorded it. He was just, oh my god, that was funny. Yeah, for like an hour, like the whole car ride home. I'm telling you.
That was one that we did debate a little bit. Was he didn't like Guardians of the Galaxy 1, but he loved Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I also happen to love Guardians of the Galaxy 2, so we overlap there, but the idea that you just straight up wouldn't like Guardians 1, like, just makes no sense to me at all.
Guardians of the Galaxy angered Confused Matthew so much that he was inspired to work on a larger project. This time, however, he wasn't just going to review the movie itself in a longer format. Instead, he made a half-hour-long rant called Marvel Madness, or Why Marvel Studios Sucks Ass. In this video, he lambasted Marvel's business practices, treatment of talent, low-quality productions, and for creating a bad precedent for other studios to create cinematic universes. The video sparked a lot of controversy at the time, but again, given how many people are tired of the cinematic universe trend nowadays, many might say that the video has aged well. While the Marvel Madness video was a big controversy at the time, it wasn't long after until Confused Matthew released another one of his most noteworthy videos, that being a re-review of The Lion King. Here, Confused Matthew goes into much more detail about why he feels the way he does about the movie, while responding to some of the points of criticisms that his original review got. While many people were still not aligned with Confused Matthew's opinion, a lot of them agreed that he at least did a better job explaining himself and making the review more entertaining by adding good jokes.
Gonna do another review because the first one apparently wasn't controversial enough, and also I had to cut some things from the first one because of YouTube's 10-minute time limit at the time, so now I'll put it all back in and do the review I first wrote in its completion, and maybe revisit some points I made and see if they'd still hold up. I think a lot of them do. So now, without any further ado, here's another Lion King review.
This re-review ended up being the final really big Confused Matthew review, at least as far as this era is concerned. He continued creating general reviews and shorter videos into 2015, even creating a brand new channel for them on June 3rd, 2015. On this channel, he hosted some of his more recent content and decided to delete his original channel, which he felt served no purpose anymore. Confused Matthew's last scheduled video was intended to be a re-review of Back to the Future Part 2 that was supposed to be released on October 21st, 2015, also known as the same day that they traveled to in the future. However, since Paramount was being very copyright heavy around this time, on top of Burnout in general, Confused Matthew cancelled the project, instead ending his show on a general review of Inside Out. In addition to the Back to the Future Part 2 review, there were also movies on Confused Matthew's to-do list which never saw the light of day, such as Australia, Being John Malkovich, Cloverfield, The Prestige, The Wrestler, and Fight Club. It's unclear as to whether or not Confused Matthew changed his opinions on these films, or if he never got around to them for other reasons. Either way, it seemed at this point, Confused Matthew was done for good.
You know his words will get you far.
Reboot!
On March 17th, 2017, Confused Matthew uploaded a new trailer onto his YouTube channel, teasing his return and an upcoming review of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Despite his previous burnout, Confused Matthew was ready to give reviewing movies a second shot, helped by encouragement of his brother. Confused Matthew did indeed release his review of Batman v Superman, which was done in a much different style. Rather than focus almost solely on the script and go through the movie beat for beat, this review covered the movie in different sections and went over aspects such as the directing and acting. Beyond this, Confused Matthew released other videos, including random rants, trailer reactions, and general reviews of new movies like Wonder Woman, Blade Runner 2049, and Death Note 2017. He even did a review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where he called it great and gave it a 10 out of 10, in stark contrast to his views on the first film. In addition, he re-released many of his older reviews under the brand Confused Classics. However, since he was still not happy with many of his reviews from the blip days, he decided to only upload his videos from 2007 to early 2009. For the rest of 2017, it seemed to be smooth sailing. Daniel had finally found the format of Confused Matthew he was the happiest with, many of his fans were very supportive of the new show, and it seemed like all was going well. Unfortunately, behind the scenes, things were not the same. Despite positive reception, Daniel was experiencing many issues, leading him to discontinue the Confused Matthew reboot altogether.
Why did I stop for a second time? And the answer, once again, was personal issues that this time were actually kind of scary and dangerous. We're talking going from just having a lot of issues in my personal life and that kind of thing to actually flirting with the idea of self-harm and worthlessness and trying desperately to not go back to the self-medication. I had received some news that I had an actual physical medical condition that nobody really knew what it was, and nobody really knew how serious it was. And I fell into a crisis. And I couldn't do it anymore.
The Confused Matthew reboot was abruptly cancelled, with his final video being a review of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, uploaded on December 19th, 2017. The channel remained dormant for around a year and a half, with no new content coming out. During this time, though, Daniel did have an online presence, albeit a decidedly much smaller one than before. While he was done doing reviews, Daniel was active on Twitch, where he continued discussing movies, as well as other topics, while playing video games. Feeling that his audience might enjoy said format, he uploaded a discussion of Avengers Endgame while playing Fallout 76 on July 12th, 2019. A day after that, he uploaded another video of a live discussion wherein he talked about where he had been this whole time and what his plans were going forward.
So here's the conclusion. I'm not doing Confused Matthew anymore, you guys. I'm very, very sorry. I did it for longer than I should have. If you are still interested in what I have to say about films and about anything, this is the best I can do for you. Going forward, it is going to be live streams on Twitch that I will upload to YouTube. You can still hear my opinions, you can still hear my thoughts, but it's not going to be an edited, written persona comedy format. I'm not a writer, I'm not a comedian, I'm not a video editor.
For a while, Daniel continued posting clips, as well as streaming directly to the Confused Matthew channel, but he eventually decided to move away from YouTube and stick to mostly Twitch, where he still occasionally streams to this day. I won't give away his Twitch handle here, as it's very clear to me that Daniel is not a big fan of attention, but good on him for continuing. While Confused Matthew is gone, those who watched his reviews do certainly remember him, some fondly, and others not so fondly.
A default setting of being generally sad, but since we don't like Simba and we didn't know Mufasa very well,
but since we don't like Simba.
On May 24th, 2020, large YouTube reviewer YourMovieSucks.org decided to watch and respond to Confused Matthew's original review of The Lion King. This occurred during one of his Twitch streams. It seemed very out of left field for a big creator to talk about a review from a smaller creator that was over a decade old at this point, but YMS, aka Adam, explains his reasoning for doing so.
Probably watched this review sometime in 2009, and I saw his subscriber count, and he had like 9,000 subscribers or something like that. And I watched this review and I was like, if this guy can get 9,000 subscribers, I can fucking do that. That was literally like what can that was like not even kidding. That was like one of the moments for like creating my YouTube channel, was watching the Confused Matthew Lion King review and being like, if this gigantic piece of shit can get views. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, this, if Confused Matthew didn't exist, then YMS might not exist.
Adam went through Confused Matthew's entire review and responded to it point by point. This prompted Daniel and Gabriel to clap back with a response on Stand and Stan's YouTube channel, where they disagreed with most of Adam's points, but did find the video to be entertaining nonetheless.
Have you been keeping up with Curb Your Enthusiasm?
No, not a drop.
I see. Okay, well, there was an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry got very, very upset with a coffee shop, and so he started his own coffee shop, like, directly across from, like, literally in the same building across from the other coffee store, and he started just practically giving his coffee away so that it would ruin the other coffee place's business, and he literally called it a spite store. He literally just opened it out. He had no interest in it. And that is, I'm starting to realize that is what YourMovieSucks.org is. This is Adam's spite store. I created the spite store. This is fucking,
I love
this
it.
is absolutely,
I love it.
absolutely hilarious.
I love it.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's keep going.
Following this, Adam had brief correspondence with both Daniel and Gabriel through Twitter. Gabriel even had an audio discussion with Adam, which was recorded, but unfortunately never saw the light of day.
Yeah, I did actually record, and you're gonna hate me. Everybody's gonna hate me. I lost the recording because my computer died. But he was. I reached out to him, and I actually recorded a little interview with him. Nothing to do with Dan or anything. I wanted to ask him what he thinks drives popular opinion. And it was a very interesting interview. He's a very kind and generous person. It was really cool. And then my computer decided to melt itself and the thing doesn't exist anymore.
That's too bad.
Sorry to say, but yeah.
I stumbled across Confused Matthew around the time I was getting not only into internet critics, like Doug Walker and James Rolfe, but also professional critics like Siskel and Ebert. While I often did not agree with Confused Matthew's overall consensus on the films he talked about, I still stuck around for two reasons. One is because that I think when he wants to be, Confused Matthew is really funny. There are so many quotable lines from his reviews that I still find entertaining to this day. Secondly, even when I disagreed with him, or flat out didn't understand where he was coming from on a subject, I always found it refreshing to hear a dissenting opinion on a work that you don't hear every day. To be fair, Siskel and Ebert and Your Movie Sucks are critics who I'd probably disagree with just as much as I do Confused Matthew, but I still stick around for the same reasons. I find them entertaining and decently insightful. As far as controversial creators are concerned, Confused Matthew is definitely one of the more innocent in that category. The intention behind the character was to be another angry reviewer, but due to the gimmick of him having contentious opinions that differed from the majority, it would be easy to write him off as a troll from an outside perspective. It's sometimes hard to distinguish how much of what's in a review comes from the blurred lines between one's character and their own personality. Especially in the angry reviewer subgenre, it was always a crapshoot on whether or not you were watching someone who understood the satire of the characters, or someone who was feeding into actual negativity. With that said, Confused Matthew never involved himself in any bad or inappropriate behavior. While you could make the argument that he went too far in a lot of his videos by insulting the filmmakers and audience that enjoyed the products they made, you would never see Confused Matthew go as far as to target them directly on Twitter or something like that. In Confused Matthew's case, it was all hyperbole intended for his character that stemmed from a result of personal issues and the angry reviewing genre in general.
No, I'll say this. He's been nothing but kind to me. He's always been so supportive of all my projects. His brother too, actually. His brother was, I made this movie called Sexually Frank, and he was really, he really thought the movie was great. And, those guys have just always had my back, and they got right back to me, a million years ago, and they've stayed in contact with me. And, yeah, they're some of my favorite, friends that I've met from YouTube, frankly. They're great guys.
If you missed Confused Matthew's reviews back in the day, I would recommend going back and checking them out, so long as you don't have a problem with hearing opinions that may not be congruent to your own viewpoints, and can look past the hyperbolic insults flung at certain filmmakers. If anything, his videos act as an entertaining time capsule to an earlier era of film reviews on YouTube that show some of the seeds that sprouted into what it is nowadays. Even if you don't end up enjoying them, in the words of Confused Matthew,
"You clicked, not me."
Thanks for watching this video. If you'd like to donate to our channel, follow the links in the video description to donate on Patreon or PayPal. You can also send us money via Super Chats or join our channel memberships. Also join the Discord server to talk to me and some of my other subscribers. If you feel so inclined, be sure to comment, like, subscribe, and share for more videos. This video falls under fair use as a commentary. Big thanks to both Frankie Frayne from Red Cow Entertainment and Gabriel Warren for being interviewed and providing additional information for this project. Until next time, I don't know, Purple Monkey Dishwasher.